So knowing that the best way to convince a man is to show him, the authorities planned Exercise Desert Rock, an army maneuver yet containing many aspects of a drama. The time, the morning of November 1st, 1951. The place, Yucca Flat, a desolate stretch of Nevada wasteland. The cast of characters, military authorities, civilian atomic energy officials and observers, and the troops, 1,500 strong. Big chiefs and Indians, all playing supporting roles to that Johnny-come-lately of our arsenal, an atomic bomb. And therein lay the moral of the play, its lesson. It was this: the atomic bomb is not only a strategic, but a tactical tool, which can be effectively and safely used in direct support of ground troops. Therefore, the Desert Rock troops had been told they should regard it with respect and confidence. The confidence a fighting man has in his weapons when he knows they're tough on the target and easy on himself. This they were told, and this they would soon find out through experience. Sure, this was a carefully controlled experiment. No one would get hurt, not back here, 7 miles from the place where the bomb would go off. The men had the word of those who knew through trial and test, computation and calculation. But anxiety and tension can be neither calculated nor computed away. Not when you're a few minutes from the biggest noise you've ever heard, the mightiest show of power you've ever seen. Not when you know that making its final run is a plane that will shortly drop an A-bomb, bringing a giant act of violence to a spot where for so many centuries nothing much had ever happened. Where change had always been gradual, measured over geologic ages. In Yucca Flat, things would begin popping any minute now.
Put on goggles or face away from the target area.
Looking at an atomic explosion with the naked eye will cause a temporary impairment of vision, like looking at the sun. Nothing serious, but enough to draw the curtain on the show of shows no one wanted to miss.
30 seconds, final. Bomb away.
Soldier of his gift of gab, his knack for the choice phrase covering the situation, but this did it. And because they hadn't seen anything like it, they fumbled for the right comments to fit the phenomenon. It wasn't easy. The usual adjectives were inadequate. Conventional measuring sticks were feeble. There's nothing to compare an atomic explosion to except another atomic explosion. This shot, nicknamed Dog, was a typical aerial burst, detonated between 1,000 and 2,000 feet in the air. Its identifying marks were standard. First, the light accompanying the burst had lasted longer than the flash of an ordinary explosion. And now it wrote its signature in the sky, the mushroom cloud formation that is the autograph of the atomic bomb. Dog was the type of nuclear burst which, as history and experiment have shown, delivers a deadly, devastating combination of blast, heat, and immediate radiation. It was, so the troops had been advised, a bad weapon to have against you, a good one to have on your side. It left no radiological hazards for the troops it supported. Its radioactive cloud rose high and drifted harmlessly away, leaving the target area free from contamination and safe to enter. and entering it was the next step on the program for the troops. From far off, they had seen dog in action and heard its bark. Now they were going to inspect its bites. How do the men feel?
So now they want to see what their positions look like.
The positions held the answers. The first one on the itinerary was the battalion combat team area, located much closer to the berth. A command and control group, including experts trained in detecting and estimating radiation dangers, went on ahead. When the monitors' reports were in, the troops got their orders.
All right, Sam, have the troops start moving forward now.
All right, sir.
This was what the men had been waiting for. They had felt the blast and heat of the explosion and watched the cloud rush upwards into the sky. Now they would see at first hand what the effects of this bomb had been. And so they moved off toward the BCT area, which was about 2 miles from ground zero, the point directly under the bomb. What would they find there? They had a healthy curiosity, because that was the place which, under actual battle conditions, they would have been occupying at the time of the blast. To get the answers, it had been set up before the burst as a typical position, with standard field fortifications. Prepared for punishment were vehicles, emplacements, and equipment of various sorts. There were guns, large and small. Some were above ground and exposed. Others were planted at emplacements, providing varying degrees of protection. The men had dug foxholes. They had picked up film badges which register radiation and attached them to their weapons. Then they had withdrawn, leaving their proxies behind them. It was a ghost camp, armed but unmanned, abandoned to whatever might come. What did come the following morning when dog was unleashed were the customary complements of an A-bomb: blast, heat, and nuclear radiation. The blast had ripped a tent, but had caused no other damage. Heat had scorched some paint on exposed items, while those underground had escaped the searing breath of the bomb. Film badges and other radioactive devices showed that dog's immediate radiation, released within 90 seconds after the explosion, had been insignificant at this distance from the burst. And there was no residual radioactivity or contamination. The evidence proved that had the troops occupied this BCT area, they would have been unaffected by the atomic detonation and could have launched an attack immediately afterward. The heat would have burned the exposed skin of the men who were above ground, but it wouldn't have harmed a hair on the wiser heads of those properly sheltered. The men moved out of the area in simulated attack toward ground zero. Now they were carrying their rifles. They were also carrying a keener appreciation of the shelter, the foxhole, and emplacement when working with an atomic bomb. Dig in, get underground. Those were rules for self-protection. From there, from the total desolation of ground zero, the men turned away. They could have gone through it safely. Although dog's blast, heat, and radiation would have brought triple death to all exposed persons in the vicinity at the time of the explosion, the area was now harmless. Monitors kept constant check with their radiac instruments and found no hazards in the form of radioactivity. The troops turned away because on this scenic educational tour of Yucca Flats, they had 2 more places to inspect, 2 more prepared positions to demonstrate what might have been. Position 1 was slightly more than 1,000 yards from ground zero. It had taken a beating. The blast had reshuffled the elements in the picture. The heat had changed its pigments. The blast had pushed this Jeep, which weighs over a ton, back 5 feet and had broken the windshield. The upholstery was charred. The side of a bulldozer had been damaged. This happened to an unanchored Bailey bridge. This to a footbridge. A ration case had taken a 25-foot ride. Sandbags were broken, burned, and kicked around. Wires looked like Orioles' nests. They were severed and tangled. The blast smacked a pole, outdoing the most eager of beavers. Heat had brushed the scene with its sepia tone, charring, scorching, burning. From what they saw in position 1, between 1/2 and 3/4 of a mile from ground zero, the authorities figured that blast-driven missiles would have caused many injuries to unsheltered personnel. The heat would have been more punishing. For those in the open, it might have ended the story suddenly, in the middle of a sentence. 100% casualties from third-degree and clothing burns was the estimate. That was enough. But it wasn't all. Film badges planted in the area recorded an average dosage from the bomb's prompt radiation sufficient to have made everybody sick, and a great many eventually would have died. It was a persuasive post-mortem on probabilities, but it covered only the calculated fate of persons presumed to have been without protection at all, or inadequately shielded in vehicles and shallow skirmishers' trenches. Underground, it was different, and the deeper and stronger the hole, the brighter the picture. True, some top covers had been blown off. Revetting bowed. But it was felt the occupants might have escaped injury. Otherwise, no blast damage was evident, and soldiers utilizing their emplacements and foxholes the right way would have been safe from dogs' heat and dangerous radiations. They'd have been equally secure in tanks. Convinced even more that atomic power had not pushed the familiar below-ground emplacement into the background, the troops went to position 2, 500 yards farther away from ground zero. The above-ground punishment meted out by dog's blast and heat gave the troops plenty to think about. There didn't seem to be much doubt that if you exposed yourself to the brunt of the bomb, you stood a good chance of being knocked into the hereafter. You stood a better chance of being burned to death. Radiation? Well, at this point, it wouldn't matter much. You can only be so dead. The scenes above the surface supplied the soldiers with food for thoughtful concern. Those below gave them the solution. These foxholes and emplacements had been able to take it, and to those who had utilized them properly, they would have meant safety from all the bomb's destructive, killing elements. For the troops, the drama of Exercise Desert Rock came to its educational end at position 2. They had come, seen, and been convinced. They had learned they could work safely with the A-bomb. The foxhole was still the key to survival. It protected against blast, gave line of sight shielding from flash heat, and considerably reduced the effects of radiation. They would have been all right by taking advantage of the standard field emplacements at or beyond 1,000 yards from ground zero. But for exposed troops, the damage area was about 12 times as great, and there would have been some casualties out to 3,500 yards. There would have been trouble back as far as position 3, about 1.5 miles from the burst. Not from radiations, but there a canvas water tank caught fire. Exposed items were burned enough to suggest that to unshielded personnel, there would have been some severe burns. The blast had by no means been an easy nudge. So in the face of such evidence, which club did a soldier want to join? The cautious or the careless? The quick or the dead? The men had unlearned some things too. Now they knew they could safely cross the area under an aerial atomic explosion shortly after it had occurred. They had just done it. The film badges they had worn during the operation showed that none of them had received any significant dosage of radiation. There had been some radioactivity, but there's some every place. It was with the men in the radium dials of their wristwatches.
So was the dirt with us. They hauled out some brooms and gave us the brush off before we left position 2 for camp. Decontamination, they called it, in case we had some radioactive particles on us. Well, we'd found out we hadn't. Not enough to bother. So I figured the big idea was to put the sand back on the desert so it could get another flying start at us. That was okay with me. I felt a lot different about the stuff on the way home than I did earlier that day. It's got its points, even if they sting a little. Very democratic, Dirt is. Doesn't pick on any one guy. Doesn't care about rank. Covers both GIs and generals. It protects them, too. After the party, one of the other men said that now he really understood why they called it Mother Earth. Because it's a soldier's foster mother, all right, if he sticks close to her.